Warren St. George's.
Perfectly good sense there.
Order.
That's so much gas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise today to speak to the issues and concerns that my constituents in Random Buren and St. George's have raised with me about the measures contained in the budget that we are debating today. Unfortunately, this is a budget that is unfair and does not generate growth, contrary to what the Conservatives would have you believe. Instead, it provides the most for those who need it the least.
That's right.
Last Tuesday, this Conservative government ended weeks of procrastination and finally presented the federal budget for 2015. To my disappointment, the Minister of Finance presented a plan to help those Canadians who need it least, instead of presenting a plan to help the middle class and those working to join it. Instead of giving all Canadians a real and fair chance of success, the Prime Minister is giving a $2.2 billion tax break to Canadians through his income splitting scheme, a program, by the way, that the Parliamentary Budget Officer estimates will help only 15% of Canadians.
Not fair.
On top of that, the Prime Minister's decision to raise the retirement age from 65 to 67 and double the limit for the tax-free savings account is being paid for by taking $32,000 out of old age security for our elderly who need it the most. The Minister of Finance also claims the budget is balanced, a misleading claim at best. Make no mistake, the budget was not balanced by stimulating the economy and job growth. In fact, the Bank of Canada said last week that the Canadian economy saw zero growth in the first quarter of this year. According to a recent projection by the International Monetary Fund, 139 countries are ahead of Canada for expected growth in 2015. And that projection was made before the recent decline in oil prices. CIBC has said job quality is at a 25-year low and declining. A Statistics Canada survey released earlier this month reported that another 28,000 full-time jobs had disappeared. A recent report in the Globe and Mail stated that Canada is in its longest period of anemic job growth outside a recession since 1976, which is when Statistics Canada started keeping comparable records. This lackluster job growth is bad news for all Canadians, but especially for our youth, who need that very first job. As our young people strive to start a career, it becomes harder for them to do so as the economy stagnates and opportunities disappear. Recently released employment data for the province I represent, Newfoundland and Labrador, shows that unemployment levels are steadily rising. The general unemployment rate for February 2015 was 12.6%, up nearly a full percentage point from February 2014. For the same period, the unemployment rate for young people aged 15 to 24 was 16.4%. Adult children are moving back in with their parents because many can't get that first job, Mr. Speaker. And if they are lucky enough to secure work, if jobs are available, they are part-time, making it difficult, if not impossible, for them to survive by their own means. That is the impact such a weak economy is having on parents and their children. While this government provides tax giveaways to those who need them least, there are people throughout our country who are struggling to make ends meet and having to tighten their belts to provide for their families. Household debt is at a record high. 2/3 of middle-class parents are worried about affording post-secondary education for their children. No, this budget was not balanced by sound economic management. This budget isn't actually balanced at all.
That's right.
Not to mention that over the last decade, this Conservative government has added $150 billion to the national debt, and unemployment is higher than it was before the recession. The Conservatives brought the books back into the black by selling off assets like the remaining GMC stocks and cutting the contingency fund by $2 billion. Not exactly a plan for the future. Contingency funds are meant to deal with unforeseen circumstances, emergencies that might arise. Just this past January, The Minister of National Defense said, quote, "We won't be using a contingency fund.
Yeah.
A contingency fund is there for unforeseen circumstances like natural disasters," end quote. He apparently forgot to tell the Minister of Finance. The Conservatives are clearly more focused on looking good before the election than they are on growing the economy and helping Canadians in need. We only need to look at where money is being spent to see where this government's real priorities are and who they appear to have written off. This budget is clearly more about politics than people.
Absolutely.
Mr. Speaker, there is no new funding for Marine Atlantic, which faced a $108.1 million cut earlier this year and is not only a vital part of Newfoundland and Labrador's economy, it serves as an extension of the Trans-Canada Highway connecting our province with the rest of our country. With the Conservative government fixated on cutting expenditures at all costs and demanding what I think is an unreasonable percentage of cost recovery from Marine Atlantic, the Crown Corporation found it necessary to increase its fares by a total of 11% the past 3 years. Less government funding may well result in yet more fare increases. For those producing goods for sale on the mainland, higher shipping costs using Marine Atlantic make their goods less competitive. For those shipping products to our province, the high cost is added to the cost of the product and absorbed by the consumer. For those in the tourism industry, high fares are a deterrent to visitors. Fare increases impact everyone. Yet another example of where the government has fallen short in this budget, Mr. Speaker. It does not address the immediate needs of the Canadian Armed Forces. Although the mission to Iraq has been expanded, the last few years have seen major cuts to the Canadian Armed Forces bottom line. Budget 2015 defers all new defense spending until 2017. Is it any wonder the budget is being referred to as Budget 2017 and not Budget 2015? Right. Canadians are tired of seeing the Conservative government pay lip service to issues affecting our enlisted men and women. For those who are presently deployed or will be deployed this year and next to an extremely dangerous conflict zone, the fact that funding for upgrades to resources has been pushed out to 2017 has to be worrisome for those directly involved and for their families. Whenever we ask our armed forces personnel to put themselves in a situation where in many cases their life is at risk, the very least we owe them is our full support by providing them with all the resources necessary to keep them as safe as possible. It is irresponsible and disrespectful to offer anything less. Again, it speaks volumes about the misguided priorities of this government when they are more concerned about presenting the illusion of a balanced budget and saving $2 billion in taxes for those who need the break least than they are in supporting our military. However, no one should be surprised. Over the past 10 years, we have seen repeatedly the callous attitude of the Conservatives towards our enlisted men and women and our veterans. We watched as the former Minister of Veterans Affairs just ignored the concerns that were being raised by a spouse of a veteran. Veterans are forced to repeatedly prove that they are still amputees as a result of service injuries. As Matt Edwards, who is a veteran from Newfoundland, said, "Could the government not save money and make life easier for veterans by streamlining medical approvals? Common sense solutions seem to elude this government." Mr. Speaker, my Liberal colleagues and I believe every Canadian deserves a real chance of success, and that budget should be balanced by growing the economy, not by using smoke and mirrors or creative accounting, which we witnessed happen last week with the Conservative government. We need to cancel the Prime Minister's unfair income splitting scheme from which only 15% of Canadians will benefit. We need to reverse the unthinkable decision that forces our seniors to wait 2 extra years to receive their OAS benefits. It is a particularly cruel decision for those seniors who will have no other source of income at age 65 and have to rely on the welfare assistance programs in the provinces. Not everyone is able to continue to work past 65, as some Conservatives have said is an option. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are being served a budget that benefits those who need help the least. The needs of the most vulnerable in Canada, including senior students and veterans, are being ignored by this government, and it is obvious Canada needs new economic management with measures to protect the most vulnerable and a plan to build the middle class and grow the economy. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Fleetwood Port Kells.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is very, very simple to the member. Why do the Liberals and the NTP, they continue to oppose all the measures our government introduced for the middle class, and about 600,000 seniors with low income below 60,000 are currently maximizing their TFSA room and will benefit from the measure. About 11 million Canadians have a tax-free savings account, with the vast majority of accounts belonging to, of course, low and middle income earners. Why would the Liberals and the NDP take away education savings, retirement savings, and first-time home buyer savings from the middle class? So why are they so against prosperity for the middle class?
Member for Random Buren St. George's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for her question. And the answer is an obvious one. This budget does so little to help the middle class and those who are trying hard to become a part of the middle class that no one in their right mind could possibly support it. If you look at the tax breaks that are in this budget, they are geared to those who need them least. It is time to listen to what Canadians are saying, and that is what we have been doing as Liberals, listening to Canadians from coast to coast to coast, hearing what their priorities are, and determining from our perspective, having listened to what they had to say, what it is we need to be doing as a government and what this government needs to be doing, instead of ignoring the priorities of Canadians. It is not about the Conservative government. It is about Canadians. It is about their money, taxpayers' dollars, that the government is deciding to use to put in place programs and give tax breaks that are of no value. I mean, the income tax splitting scheme will benefit 15% of Canadians. How is that a responsible decision?
That's right. Hear, hear.
Questions and comments. L'honorable député de Beauport-Limoilou.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à ma collègue pour son discours. Justement, parlant du fractionnement du revenu, en défense de sa collègue qui avait fait un discours précédemment, la ministre d'État au développement économique de l'Ouest, à moins que j'ai raté quelque chose, peut-être que ma collègue peut me corriger là-dessus, mais elle a refusé de prononcer les mots « fractionnement du revenu ». Et ça, je dois vous avouer que c'est un mystère, justement, là, cette censure, visiblement, vis-à-vis au moins des membres du cabinet conservateur sur l'utilisation du mot « fractionnement du revenu », mot qui est d'ailleurs introuvable dans le texte du budget. Alors, j'aimerais que ma collègue élabore sur cette consigne qui semble frapper certains membres du caucus conservateur, ou au moins du cabinet conservateur.
Honourable Member for Random Buren St. George's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his question. And I think what is happening here is that it's become pretty obvious that Canadians are not reacting favorably to the income tax splitting scheme. They've heard what's been said in terms of the number of Canadians who will benefit from this, and they're realizing that this was not a good measure to put in the budget. Right. Like the former finance minister, the late Jim Flaherty, said, this is not a good initiative. And in fact, he spoke extensively about that and tried to convince his colleagues that it was not the right thing to do. But what happened? Because the Prime Minister had committed to it and had committed to those who deserve it least, so they could benefit from this high tax break, that of course they went ahead with it, much to the chagrin of most Canadians who are now realizing that they're not going to benefit from this and do not like the measure that's contained in this budget.
Here, here.
We have time for one more short question and response. The honourable member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I wanted to commend my colleague on her speech about the bogus balanced budget, B3 for want of a better term. And I wanted to ask her, what was the emergency to get to the bogus balanced budget, since they sold off GM shares and lost $100 million doing that, and they raided the emergency/contingency fund for $2 billion to get to the bogus balanced budget. So just what was the emergency other than the Prime Minister's mandate to get to bogus balance?
The honourable member for Random Buren and St. George's. A short response, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for the question, and I think anyone who's listening and everyone in this House, at least those of us who are in opposition, realize that the emergency is the federal election that's coming up in October. This budget is more about politics than about people. We are ignoring the most vulnerable in our society with this budget, and this government, there is no emergency, and I think as the former Minister of Defense said, they won't use a contingency. Well, guess what? They use the contingency. And unfortunately, because contingencies are meant only for natural disasters, according to the minister, I'm asking, where's the natural disaster, other than the fact that there's ever the possibility that this government could get reelected?
Before